Silent Hill is a survival horror video game series developed by Konami, made popular from the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 3 consoles. Silent Hill 2 was the second game in that franchise, and was released on the PlayStation 2 in 2001. Silent Hill 2 is the story of a man named James Sunderland, who's called by the town of Silent Hill to search for his deceased wife. Gameplay is pretty simple. You start off with nothing, then as you slowly piece together the world of Silent Hill, you newly acquire weapons as you advance in the story. As you explore the world, everything starts to piece together. Why Silent Hill looks like that, how the town molds itself to your feelings, and so on. Many find that the combat and puzzles of Silent Hill 2 to be jarring and old-fashioned, and you may be right. The combat is incredibly simplistic, with you ending up button mashing for James to do something with his board of wood. Puzzles can sometimes be a tedious task, but are easy to complete if you have enough patience. Majority of the story of Silent Hill is James just searching for his wife, who sent a letter asking him to visit the town of Silent Hill. Along the way, you find other characters like Angela, a depressive and suicidal person searching for her mother and coming to Silent Hill after the guilt of killing her abusive father in self-defense. Eddie is another character you find who comes to Silent Hill after being bullied for his whole life and being guilty of killing someone. I guess the main takeaway here is that all the characters who came to Silent Hill seek retribution for their actions. The heavy subject matter plays into the psychological traits Silent Hill 2 is known for, and it forces the player to come to terms with the deeper meaning Hiroki Owaku placed in the game. Some of the more apparent themes that appear throughout the narrative include grief, guilt, and punishment. Seen during the game is James's guilty consciousness, manifested in the forms of enemies that the player engages with, the puzzles they must solve to proceed, as well as the symbolism within them. A primary example of this manifestation of guilt is Pyramid Head, a tall, masculine, faceless, and humanoid figure, whose head is concealed by a large pyramid-shaped helmet that is made of rusted iron. Pyramid Head also wields a large blade titled the Great Knife that it heaves across the floor in almost all player encounters. Its design not only serves to psychologically frighten the player, as the sharp edges of the triangular head were intentionally illustrated to suggest the possibility of pain, as explained by Masashiro Ito, but is also emblematic of many of the themes related to the narrative, as it represents the guilt that James experienced, the retribution he seeks for his actions, and the sexual frustration that he felt with his late wife, Mary, who was terminally ill. Silent Hill can be described as this entity that pulls in the ones who are guilty to be punished for their actions. It's an entity that shapes itself to fit the perception of anyone who visits. James only seeing amalgamations of his dead wife, such as Maria, who taunt his actions for killing her. His inner sexual frustrations are reconceptualized as the nurses from the hospital, as well as Maria herself, who's just a more sexualized version of Mary, his dead wife. For Angela, the town amalgamates itself into being on fire, and Eddie, he only sees the residents taunting him to do violent things. The town of Silent Hill punishes those who are guilty and seek out that action. That whole idea is why Pyramid Head exists, just to function as an answer to James's guilt for killing his own wife. Either way, all the characters are punished, with Angela being consumed by the flames.
It's hot as hell in here.
You see it too? For me, it's always like this.
And Eddie being killed by James in the freezer for going insane. Silent Hill 2's gritty atmosphere of dread and ambiguity sets up this idea of a place only existing as the final resting place for those who have done terrible things and seek retribution. I think a lot of this talk about the town forming itself to other people's desires made me think back to a comment on a Silent Hill 2 music video talking about Maria's existence. Not only is Maria more than a monster, she's an almost fully functioning human being who almost has her own thoughts and feelings outside of thinking about James. Just thinking about this makes me realize how totally screwed up Maria's existence is. She literally just exists to fulfill James's fantasy of a perfect wife. But what nobody seems to consider is how Maria is obviously traumatized or disturbed by this idea. Imagine only existing thanks to somebody's sexually frustrated wish. Imagine desperately trying to be your own person while struggling against how you were made to think and how you solely exist to cater to a man who probably doesn't even want to be with you. The amount of pain you would go through just knowing all of this all along, with being constantly killed by the very personification of guilt relating to a man whose wish you were born from, as well as being resurrected by the only town and place you've ever known. No! I remember first learning about Silent Hill 2 from a meme at first, as dumb as that might sound. But back in 2019, I was scrolling through Instagram, nothing special except for this rap meme saying,
"Change the world. My final message. Goodbye."
This really intrigued me because the sounds of it just emanated this nostalgic and melancholic piece that I've never heard before. I had to investigate, and sure enough, other people were feeling the exact same way. The brief synths that you hear were just sped up versions of the piece White Noise, created by none other than Akira Yamaoka. And that leads me to one of my favorite parts of Silent Hill 2, the music. For many, playing video games can be sometimes a lackluster task, especially for multiplayer games. Sometimes there's really no time to stop and appreciate some of the smaller things that make a game so good. In Silent Hill 2's case, the team put such a huge emphasis on sounds and music, to the point that it becomes one of the biggest parts of the video game, and is extremely hard to ignore. Akira puts so much thought into the tracks, and they serenade the listener, immersing them in these desolate hellscapes with monsters roaming everywhere. I don't know if it's the mellow or melancholic sounds of White Noise, or the lo-fi charms of A World of Madness, or the pianic melodies of Magdalene, but they all aim to immerse the player with these beautiful pieces that have this charm that I cannot find in other music. The soundtrack upholds the standard of atmosphere that clicks with the surrounding environment, with every piece fitting every location in the lonely town of Silent Hill. Yamaoka's music taps into the psyche of the player, using sound to convey emotion. Not only is this a soundtrack that offers a feeling and depth, but it also represents Silent Hill 2's narrative and gameplay perfectly. I think Michael Pimentel's article sums up the soundtrack really well. Even though all the music on the album is engaging to listen to, an essential part of it is that it effectively works within the game. The droning compositions flow over time as the players run about the town, the drumming amplifying in situations of intense anxiety. The soundtrack masterfully represents the visual and gameplay elements of Silent Hill 2. This is an astonishing feat when you consider the game's subject matter, regarding loneliness, depression, and other dark themes. That brings me to my next point. Silent Hill 2 just isn't your average horror game. It creates such a high standard for future games to follow that, in itself, the atmosphere and techniques Team Silent used to immerse the player really put Silent Hill 2 in its own category. The game itself, I really do believe, is a great attempt at perfection, because the atmosphere it creates is just worth so much merit. The clever visual storytelling, the heavy subject matter, and the music really puts into perspective the level Team Silent was on in the early 2000s. They didn't use cheap jump scares to get a fake reaction out of the player. They didn't use your average cliche horror story with you in a big mansion fighting zombies and ghosts. They focused on the mind of the player, making you question every decision you make in the game. It makes you think really deeply about the certain aspects. It goes completely Stanley Kubrick's The Shining in psychological horror, making you focus on the characters' minds as they explore the horrors that await. I guess you could attribute a lot of the horror traits of Silent Hill to the Japanese style that J-horrors are known for. The customs abroad are a lot more spiritually focused, and it comes from a long line of cultural superstition dating back to the early ages of emperors and shogunates. I'd say personally that Japanese horrors are a lot more scary and flat out disturbing than some games you see in the West. As I said before, there's a lot more complexity, emotion, empathy, fear, psychological twists, and a lot more thought put into the backstory of horrors in Japanese games, which always keeps you guessing throughout the game. Compared to some Western horror games, they focus more on running away scenes and jump scares, such as in a scene they make it very quiet and use a very loud sound to scare people out of nowhere, mostly predictable as always. Now, I'm not saying all Western horrors are like this. There are definitely some exceptions like Outlast, Amnesia, The Evil Within, Layers of Fear, plus many, many more. My point is that Western horror games is given that stereotype because of cheap horrors like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but FNAF. It's just that Japanese horror is known for a well-rounded and effective psychological horror, with a lot more disturbing imagery. And they're also known for their hints. I think we can attribute a lot of the psychological horror aspects of Silent Hill 2 to some of the aesthetic that Team Silent carefully executed in this game. As this game is heavily influenced by Andrew Wyeth and his minimal visual style, I think it's appropriate to put into light the liminal style that contributes to this Silent Hill's aesthetic. And I know that word has lost a lot of meaning, especially with 15-year-olds and their 80s style TikToks with crappy filters and sparkles. But I think revisiting Silent Hill 2's style breathes new meaning into the word aesthetic. The gritty and unapologetic atmosphere poses so many questions. Why is the town always foggy? Was the town always like this? And then you realize that the town changed its appearance to match anyone's current anxieties and guilt. Some might say that the graphics of Silent Hill 2 have not aged well, but I believe the opposite. I believe that there is charm to the jarring graphics, and it creates depth in the game, to the point that it reflects the narrative of Silent Hill as this town, which is a direct representation of people's inner fears. Silent Hill 2 style is heavily referent of the phenomenon called liminal spaces, which in layman's terms means the middle ground of where you left to where you are going. It's basically a term to describe a place where your brain would expect something that isn't actually there. So some photos of playgrounds and school hallways that are lifeless makes your brain question the image, as it's so used to those places being filled with people. It cannot give that image meaning with the previous experiences. For those who have no idea what I'm talking about, then have a look at this image. Yeah, for some, that image doesn't really make them feel particularly comfortable. Silent Hill 2 uses so much imagery in the liminal style. Streets full of shops that you think would be full of life are now empty and disturbed, bringing new meaning to the word lonely. Silent Hill 2's usage of these spaces in its style contributes to the psychological aspect of the game, where now your brain feels discomfort when around these places, not just when the monster is near. Kubrick actually uses this technique a lot in The Shining, where once bustling corridors and lobbies of the Overlook Hotel are now deserted and empty, making your brain feel uncomfortable as it's not accustomed to these areas. I remember first playing Silent Hill 2 on the PlayStation 2. It was a more mysterious step that became the rebound from my experiences playing Gmod horror maps with my friends. In a way, I could probably say that the whole Gmod experience as a whole has influenced me to get into Silent Hill, and it gave me a feeling of isolation and pure liminality that I can't find in any other game engine outside of Source. The whole feeling of the Source engine is way too big to explain for this video, and it really deserves its own video. I just think it's so sad to see the current state of Silent Hill, where basically the series has been forgotten by Konami. It's also become extremely hard for new fans to get a hold of copies of the game, where almost all physical copies can now go for around $100 to $500. It's just that Konami isn't willing to revive the series and manufacture a 20-year-old game. It's left some less fortunate to not own it and to buy the HD Special Edition, which is a really sad way to experience the game, as Konami basically screwed over all the graphics for a so-called remaster.
Konami! Fuck 'em!
I don't think a single horror game has really left me with such an experience and a feeling that Silent Hill 2 has. It's taught me new meanings for the words isolation, ambiguity, and fear. And its visual storytelling has left me in awe. The deeper meanings of Silent Hill 2 really challenges the psyche of many who play, contemplating how so many deal with their deepest anxieties and depressions. Playing the game now just makes me relive those feelings of nostalgia and melancholy that I think that the only game that has come close to giving me that is Minecraft, as childish as that may sound. The music of Silent Hill 2 has been and will continue to have a long-lasting effect on myself and the many who have played through the game. Silent Hill's community left a long time ago, and a lot of the audience that Team Silent pioneered this game towards got bored and left to go to other franchises. All that exists now is a community of fans who saw the game for what it is, a timeless, horrific beauty that brought new meaning to the psychological genre of horror that ended up redefining what it meant to feel fear. The game is truly a testament to how video games as a medium can not only challenge the human psyche and become a masterpiece of visual art, but create a feeling of nostalgia and melancholy that no other medium can really replicate. This has been Nathan Hines. Thanks for watching.